The pay was $45 an hour. In a city where a studio apartment that smells like wet cardboard costs $2,000 a month, you don't ask questions about a wage like that. You just sign the paperwork, hand over a copy of your ID, and try not to notice that the HR manager won't make eye contact with you. The job description was simple: night security liaison for St. Jude's Hospital. But St. Jude's hadn't seen a patient in 30 years. It sat on the edge of the industrial district like a rotting tooth, a massive Gothic structure of brick and iron that seemed to absorb the streetlights around it. On my first night, the sun dipped below the horizon, turning the sky the color of a fresh bruise, and I found myself standing before the heavy oak doors with a ring of brass keys that felt unnervingly heavy in my pocket. The air around the building was different. It was still. No birds chirped in the dying ivy, and the distant hum of the city seemed to fade into a muffled static the closer I got to the entrance. I let myself in, the click of the lock echoing through the cavernous lobby like a gunshot. The air inside tasted of dust, ozone, and something metallic, like an old penny under a tongue. I made my way to the security booth, a small glass-walled island in the center of the darkness. It was there, taped to the underside of the desk where the previous guard must have spent 1,000 lonely hours, that I found the laminated card. It wasn't an official hospital document. It was handwritten in a cramped, frantic red ink that looked almost like dried blood. It started with a warning: to whoever is next. The cameras lie, the shadows breathe, and the silence is your only friend. Follow these rules, or don't bother trying to leave at dawn. I laughed at first. I thought it was a hazing ritual, a joke played on the new guy. But as the clock ticked toward midnight, and the shadows in the corners of the lobby began to stretch and pull like black taffy, the laughter died in my throat. Rule number 1 was etched in bold. If you hear your own voice calling from the hallway, do not answer. It sounds simple on paper, but when the silence of a dead hospital begins to ring in your ears, your brain starts to crave a sound, any sound. Around 1:15 a.m., I was sitting in the booth, the glow of the flickering CCTV monitors the only light in the world. The screens showed empty corridors, rows of rusted gurneys, and peeling wallpaper that looked like hanging skin. Then I heard it. A soft, muffled voice coming from the north wing. It was a man's voice, hesitant and scared. "Hey, is anyone there? I think I'm locked in the supply closet. Please, I can't breathe in here." My heart hammered against my ribs. I reached for the radio, my thumb hovering over the talk button. I recognized that voice. It was the same pitch I heard when I spoke. It had the same slight rasp I get when I'm nervous. It was me, but I was sitting right here. I looked at the monitors. The north wing supply closet door was closed, but there was no one on the camera. The voice started again, louder, more desperate. It began to scream my own name. It began to tell secrets I had never told a living soul, about the night my sister disappeared, about the things I'd prayed for in the dark. It wasn't just a voice. It was an invitation to a trap. I gripped the edge of the desk until my knuckles turned white and my fingernails bit into the wood. I stared at the red ink on the card. Do not answer. I sat there for 3 hours while my own voice begged, cried, and eventually began to curse me from the darkness, promising to show me what happened to the people who opened the door. By the time the voice faded, the air had grown impossibly cold. I could see my breath blooming in front of me like ghost white flowers. I needed to move. I needed to feel the floor beneath my boots to convince myself I was still real. I remembered the second rule: never look directly at the ceiling in the cafeteria. Hunger is a strange thing. It can override even the most primal fear. I made my way toward the break room, my flashlight beam cutting a lonely path through the dark. The hospital felt bigger now, as if the hallways were expanding while I walked. Every time I turned a corner, I felt a presence retreating just out of sight. I reached the cafeteria. It was a massive room filled with long wooden cables. The smell here was different, sweet, like rotting fruit. I kept my eyes on the floor, watching the scuffed linoleum pass beneath my feet. I sat at a table near the back, my back against a cold brick pillar. I tried to focus on my breathing. Then the sound started. It was a rhythmic scraping, like long, dry nails dragging across the acoustic ceiling tiles. Scritch, scritch, scritch. Something was moving up there, something heavy. I felt a drop of liquid land on the back of my hand. It was clear and viscous, like thick saliva. I wanted to look up. Every muscle in my neck screamed to see what was looming above me. But I knew that the ceiling people were only bound by the rules of observation. If you don't acknowledge them, they are just shadows. If you look, you give them permission to descend. I sat there for an eternity, staring into the black surface of my cold coffee, watching the reflection of the ceiling in the liquid. I saw a pale, elongated face with too many eyes peering down from a gap in the tiles. It lowered itself until its hair, thin, white strands like spider silk, was brushing at the top of my head. It whispered my name, a sound like dry leaves blowing across a grave. I didn't blink. I didn't look up. I stayed perfectly still until the scraping moved toward the far wall and disappeared into the vents. The final hour of the shift is always the longest. The 4,000-word mark of my sanity was approaching. I had to go to the basement to return the keys. To do that, I had to use the service elevator. Rule number 3 was the most specific. The elevator will stop on the 4th floor at 3:33 a.m. Do not get out, no matter who you see standing there. The 4th floor was the maternity ward, or it used to be. It had been sealed with heavy iron chains for decades. As the elevator doors closed and the ancient motor groaned to life, I felt a sense of impending doom. The floor indicator flickered. 1, 2, 3. The elevator shuddered and came to a dead stop. The bell chimed, a clean, sharp sound that felt wrong in this place. The doors slid open. The 4th floor wasn't dark. It was filled with a soft, warm light, like a sunset. The hallway was pristine, the floor polished to a mirror shine, and standing there, right in front of the doors, was a woman. She was wearing a blue dress, the one she wore the last day I saw her. It was my mother. She looked young, vibrant, and completely whole. She smiled at me, a smile that had been buried in the earth for 10 years. "Oh, honey," she said, her voice like music. "It's so beautiful here. Just step out for a second. Let me hold you." My legs felt like lead, but I felt a pull in my chest that was stronger than any fear. I reached out a hand. My foot hovered over the gap between the elevator and the floor. But then I saw her shadow. The light was coming from behind her, but her shadow on the floor didn't match. Her shadow had long, crooked limbs and a head that was tilted at an impossible angle. It wasn't my mother. It was the 4th floor showing me the one thing I couldn't say no to. The red ink on the card had a final note. It shows you what you miss, not what you fear. I slammed my hand against the closed door button. Her mother's face contorted, her jaw dropping open until it touched her chest, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. The doors hissed shut just as a pale, clawed hand slammed against the metal. I stood in the elevator as it descended, my heart screaming in my ears. When the doors opened on the ground floor, the first rays of dawn were breaking through the grime of the lobby windows. The hospital felt empty again, just a building of brick and dust. I walked out into the cool morning air, the ring of keys feeling like a brand on my palm. I left them on the doorstep. I didn't go back for my paycheck. I didn't answer the phone when the HR manager called me 12 times that afternoon, because as I walked away from St. Jude's, I looked back at the 4th floor. The chains were still there, rusted and heavy, but in one of the windows, the light was still shining, and a pale hand was pressed against the glass, waving goodbye. I realized then that I hadn't just survived a night shift. I had been a guest in a place that doesn't belong to the living. And the rules? They weren't there to protect the guard. They were there to make sure that whatever lives in St. Jude's stays in St. Jude's. If you ever see a job posting for a night security liaison with a wage that seems too good to be true, do yourself a favor. Stay broke, stay hungry, but never under any circumstances look under the bed. Note: This script is designed for a slow, atmospheric voiceover. To reach the 5,000-word mark in a full production, you would expand the interludes between the rules with details of the hospital's history, the feeling of the hallways, and the specific sounds of the building breathing.